Hey, everyone. Well, thank you. Welcome back, AP. All right, welcome back to evening flip on the couch. Well, not evening flip. It's actually like the afternoon, but afternoon flip on the couch with Pierre and Mr. Terry. Right. So Pierre, very cute. All right. We actually will be bringing your name up in a little bit when we talk about Pierre Bale. Yes, we will. All right. So we are going to pick up in like where we would have started in class, right? But due to the fact that we only had like 7 out of 16 kids in class on what was that, Friday? Right? So, like, we are, or Thursday, or something like that. Now, like, due to that fact, though, we're just going to add a little bit more to this, right? So, yes, it'll be a little bit annoying. It's a little bit longer than you're used to. But we're going to be fine, right? So, where we left off on, though, we left off talking about Francis Bacon, right? Experimental method, the science of learning and understanding. How do we know scientific constructs, blah, 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 blah. And then also kind of this idea of like the scientific method and how it can be used for society, right? Then we're going to be moving over across the English Channel into France, right? Where we're going to talk about Rene Descartes, okay? So Descartes happens to be one of these people that adds yet another wrinkle to this idea of understanding, right? So the big thing about it is Descartes does actually like put forward the concepts of questioning things, experimental method. He's also a phenomenal mathematician, right? So the other big thing, though, that he kind of gets into this crisis of, though, as this construct of learning progresses and things like that, he does end up coming up with this thing known as the crisis of confidence, right? And the crisis of confidence really boils down to one particular thing. How do we know that anything truly exists? Therefore, how do we know that the things that we're learning actually, therefore, are taking place, right? So he actually kind of like sat around for a really, really long time and could not, for the life of him, figure out a way to understand if human beings and their essence exist or not. How do I know that I am in this place? How do I know that I'm here sitting with Pierre and that I'm not actually just in some kind of dreamscape in some other place, right? Now, this is just the thing he's most famous for. But what he does end up actually coming up with in a very, very famous quote in his book called The Discourse on Method was a phrase known as cogito ergo sum, which is Latin for I think, therefore I am, right? So what he does is he basically comes up with this context of Cartesian dualism, right? That the human mind is detached from the world around us, right? But we have the ability to seek it, understand the physical universe, and that it actually we receive our rational mind from God, right? But yet we are masters of the universe in essence because we can bend, mold, create, but we can only know that we exist because we have rational thought, right? So if you are sitting there right now watching this like flip, I don't know if you are, you may very well not be. I might be imagining recording this thing right now. However, if you are sitting there watching me, you can't prove that I exist, but you can prove that you exist due to the fact that you have rational thought, right? So this is that understanding, though, of Cartesian dualism, right? So I am sitting here doing this flip. I don't know if the world around me is very real. I don't know if anybody actually folded this laundry, the land of the laundry piles, as my wife likes to talk about. So I don't really know for sure, but I'm pretty confident because due to the fact that I can manipulate things and then also due to the fact that I know at least at the bare minimum that my mind does exist, right? Because I have thought. And this is also known as his like crisis of doubts, right? So the big thing about Descartes, though, is he's famous for a lot of different things, right? Not just that idea of I think, therefore I am. He's very, very famous for creating like problem-solving skills. His discourse on method also kind of does this thing known as the crisis of doubts, or also like the doubts themselves, where you take a huge problem scientifically and you break it up into its smaller components and you solve those components, eventually leading to your understanding, right? I'm going to like attach like a little like philosophy video down below about Rene Descartes if you want to like check that out. But he also is very, very famous for creating this bad boy in mathematics, known as a Cartesian plane, right? Because he actually apparently was sitting back on his bed one evening and was looking up at the ceiling, and this fly was just going bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. You don't like that noise? So like what ended up happening though is he looked up at his ceiling and was like, I bet if I put a grid of lines up there, I could plot where that fly was actually landing every time it took off. And so of course he came up with his X and Y axis, and bang, you've got the Cartesian plane, which is actually named directly after Rene Descartes. Now, big thing about his understanding of like the crisis of confidence, do we have rational thought in mind, do we exist somewhere, really, really did get him into some hot water, right? A lot of other like philosophers really start to question him, being like, why are you bringing God out of this, right? Why are you not saying that God has blessed you with this mind? Why are you not saying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Well, Descartes ended up actually having a little bit of a feud or a talk. Hold on, let me put this little boy down. A feud or a talk with this one other famous philosopher that you see on your screen right now, and his name is Blaise Pascal, right? So Blaise Pascal and Descartes actually did end up having a meeting where they discussed the understanding of like perception and things like that. And Pascal really, really disliked Descartes' ideas due to the fact that he thought that God was being removed from the equation and that he was not actually being like known as the person who blesses us with the universe, rather creating this universe that human beings understand and attempt to manipulate, right? So interesting little facet though is Blaise Pascal is also very, very famous for coming up with this thing called Pascal's wager. In a world where people are questioning more things and science is discovering more things, Pascal's wager stated the fact that, what if God does or does not exist, I am always going to be better off believing in him, because if he doesn't exist, I didn't waste any time because nothing's going to happen to me when I die. But if he does exist and I don't believe in him, I will be forever punished, right? So that's a really interesting little construct of Blaise Pascal, his disagreement with Descartes, the crisis of confidence, Cartesian dualism, this whole I think therefore I am shenanigans. Apparently he figured it out in his basement, right? He would like sit in a stove and like meditate and stuff for like hours on end. But the big thing about it though is Descartes, Bacon, all those other guys, Galileo, and everyone that came before him are going to offer up a considerable amount of like information, and so you're going to start seeing the growth of the experimental method, and you're also going to see that break away from this old science known as alchemy, right? So alchemy is the type of chemistry that came before, that came before like scientific methods and scientific research.
Okay, class, does everyone know what alchemy is?
Alchemy, the science of understanding, deconstructing, and reconstructing matter. However, it is not an all-powerful art. It is impossible to create something out of nothing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so if
So the big thing about it, though, is alchemists were like chemists, and they would believe that they could alter the matter around them. One of the key ideas of alchemy was trying to figure out, can you turn lead into gold, right? Can you actually literally manipulate one object into being another object, right? And so the thing about alchemy in general is that science and that superstition did hang on for quite some time, even in the face of the growing societies of science, right? So looking at this seal right here to try and show you how alchemy is dying and science is growing, you're going to start seeing a lot of state-sponsored scientific groups, right? We talked about this with absolutism already. You saw the Royal Academy of Sciences in Paris pop up after this one. You saw the Russian Academy of Science pop up after this one, right? Because this is the very first one. In 1660, Charles II is going to found the thing known as the Royal Academy of Sciences, right? And the the Royal Society, right? So the Royal Society of Sciences is very, very famous for like having a lot of really big, heavy scientific thinkers inside of it, right? They were founded in 1660 on the tagline of nullius in verba, which in Latin means take no one's word for it, right? Which is really important and also relates back to Descartes as well. Descartes said you should doubt everything, right? Never like actually like to have somebody pitch an idea to you and say that, oh, this is what it is. Go out and question it on your own. Go out and figure it out, because our mind is like the essence of God in and of itself, and our ability to understand the universe around us, right? So the interesting little thing, though, going forward is the most famous guy that liked to use this quote a lot was, funny enough, a little bit of an alchemist himself, right? Isaac Newton, right? As in Fig Newtons, right? So like now Fig Newtons are not named after Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton is actually, no, the town of Newton, Massachusetts, where Fig Newtons were invented, is actually named after Isaac Newton. So by proxy, like second generation Fig Newtons are named after Isaac Newton. Now, the interesting thing, though, is by 1640, Galileo, Kepler, Brahe, all those guys' understandings of the universe are becoming widely accepted. Now, the problem is that there's no mathematical proof of it, right? Galileo proved it using observation. Kepler used it, proved his laws of planetary motion, but literally had a big problem trying to equate this understanding of, well, what are the planets sitting in? Why are they floating? How are they moving? What is the force that does that? Kepler had no answer, right? Brahe, as we know, just had no nose and just like observed everything with his naked eye, right? So like, now the big thing though about it going forward is you're also going to see other scientific thinkers try to actually mathematically figure this stuff out, right? Descartes actually came up with an idea saying that, oh, the planets move through a fluid, an ethereal fluid, right? There's this gunk out there that like the Earth like moves through, right? Not actually necessarily right there, big fella. The guy that's going to come along finally and provide the mathematical evidence, even though he was a part-time alchemist himself, is going to be the guy named Isaac Newton, right? So Sir Isaac Newton, right? So Sir Isaac Newton, he's going to be actually knighted by Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, which is very, very ironic. Don't look at my gray outfit, by the way. I hate the fact that I'm wearing gray on gray right now. So, like, the big thing, though, Isaac Newton would be very disappointed in me. Now, well, actually, he probably wouldn't. He was a weirdo. We believe that Isaac Newton was kind of like a lot like Michelangelo, like a really, really big shut-in, like didn't really get out, didn't really talk to other people, really, really struggled to connect with others, and also apparently might have been on the spectrum somewhere, because due to the fact that he was super, super, super non-social, right? He didn't, like, actually socialize with very many people. He made fun of people in very rude ways and stuff like that. Like, a guy we'll talk about a little bit later, he made fun of the fact that he had a hunchback, right? So with a very, very famous quote saying, the only reason I've seen so far is because I've stood on the shoulders of giants, right? And that guy that he was making fun of was this dude named Robert Hooke, right? Who's going to be a very, very important guy here in a few minutes. Now, the big thing about it, though, is everybody has pretty much, like, kind of adopted the Galilean, Kepler, Brahe, Copernican understanding of the universe, right? Even though Sci Rev is still on a list of banned books somewhere, you have to understand that this guy's going to be the one that comes along and proves everything, right? Because he began to question a lot of stuff, right? He was like, how can we provide mathematical evidence to demonstrate the fact that these, like, planets have a certain movement, and how can I use numbers and mathematics to prove the ideas of the men that came before me, right? So he's going to be a very, very... This puppy, man. Like, sorry, he's a squeak toy, right? So the big thing about it, though, going forward, is the fact that he is going to, like, spend most of his younger career trying to turn lead into gold and stuff like that, but also doing a lot of observational sciences, right? Now, the big thing, first and foremost, is you have to understand his rise to prominence was not, like, immediate, right? So he actually was, like, kind of very superstitious, super religious guy, and he ended up actually going to Cambridge University, Trinity College at Cambridge University, where he actually, in his younger 20s, did most of his work and a lot of observational things. And he also wrote one of his very famous books known as The History of Fishes, right? And in The History of Fishes apparently sold, like, absolutely no copies, right? It did get published, but, like, this is a page from it. He apparently, the day he died, had stacks of them in personal storage because nobody wanted them, right? Now, later on, though, he also is going to be heavily influenced by his Christian faith, right? Like, he is a super, super adamant Christian, right? Holy bananas, like, really, really God-fearing guy, right? Now, he actually spent most of his young life after The History of Fishes trying to figure out when the world was going to end, right? As you can see, none of this stuff has to do with physics or mathematics yet, right? Now, granted, he was still working on physics and mathematics. He was still very, very intelligent, but he was more obsessed figuring out the day that the world was going to end, right? And he thought it was coming in 1666 due to the unholy numbers and the things that were happening around him. And he wasn't that far off, right? He actually observed the Great Plague break out in London, right, in 1665. And then he saw more than half of London burn down in the Great Fire of London, and all of this is happening under Charles II. But this is really, really important because it breaks him away from this, like, super, super religious, super, super superstitious, super, super, like, kind of, like weird, like, mindset he had about alchemy at the time, and he pushes him out to actually going back to his family estate. So as a young man, his father died, and his mom remarried and stuff like that, and they were farmers, right? And they actually, like, had a larger estate that they actually grew a lot of crops on top of. And so when the Great Plague of London and the Great Fire of London broke out, he moved back out to that country estate where he actually grew up for most of his life. And in that process, one day apparently, he starts playing around with two particular things: light, prisms. Well, light and prisms is one thing. And then also he apparently observed one day an apple fall from a tree, and then he begins to spend most of his existence trying to figure out what is it that yanked that apple down to the earth, right? So, like, now the big one, the first one, though, is the light and the prisms one that made him very famous. So the first thing with optics is going to be the kind of thing that makes him a little famous, and he actually adds a lot of his research to several different books. Now, his book on optics doesn't get published until 1704. Now, the thing about it, though, is he actually added a lot to other scientific researchers. And he's going to be the one that actually kind of disproves some of Descartes' theories of refraction and reflection, and he actually, like, comes along and demonstrates the fact that white light, when passed through a prism, will separate into several different types of light, right? Now, the thing that he hated, though, was the fact that there were actually only 6 shades of light. It was red, orange, yellow, blue, green, violet, right? He actually, though, added a 7th one because he thought that 6 is the number of the devil, right? And so he added indigo into, like, his research and stuff. But he noticed that if you pass light through a prism, it will separate into a spectrum spectrum, and then if it is reflected off of a mirror, it will actually recombine itself back into white light, right? So, like, he actually discovers this while living out in the countryside, avoiding these catastrophes. But it doesn't, like, that earns him, and that research earns him admittance into the Royal Society, where he becomes an avid member, right? He also becomes a parliamentarian at one point, and a lot of other stuff. But the big thing about it, though, is this is his major work, the Principia Mathematica, right, of natural philosophy. So the big thing that he comes out with, this tome that he comes out with in 1687, is going to be a massive thing, because in this book is when he breaks down the ideas of calculus, right? So, like, he breaks down the ideas of using mathematical theorems, intervals, and different methods to figure out the movement of planets, and he uses it to prove his theories of gravity, right? So, in the Principia Mathematica, he outlines the idea of, like, increasing intervals of force with larger bodies, and he uses actual mathematics to prove the fact, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the planets go around the sun, given the force of gravity and our distance away from the sun, and that affects the speed of these moving objects in different interval rates, right? And so with this, he actually comes up basically with this book, Calculus, and proves the theories of gravity. He actually also was tortured by it, because again, yet again, people start coming out and be like, what about God? And he was like, no, they wiggle a little bit and God fixes them, and he like freaks out. He also was having a really big struggle with the fact that he had a heated rival in the Holy Roman Empire. This guy named Gottfried Leibniz, who independently on his own, Leibniz, by the way, is spelled Liebniz. Leibniz, on his own, also came up with a form of calculus and lived a wildly different life than Isaac Newton did. Isaac Newton was a shut-in that never got married and we believe died never having even dated a woman. And then Gottfried Leibniz, on the other hand, was the party guy of the Holy Roman Empire who did everything else. He's kind of like the Michelangelo's Raphael, right? So Gottfried Leibniz, apparently, though, came up with all the different types of calculus, and his system of calculus is the one that we use and study now, due to the fact that Isaac Newton's calculus was so complicated and stuff like that people were like, you can't even teach this to other people, right? But still, these major titans of intelligence are going to be right next to each other for a very, very long time, right? And they had a massive rivalry over a very long period of time. But Isaac Newton, you got a lot of stuff. Light, gravity, calculus, right? Very important figure, and he proves the Galilean, Copernican, and all these other different ideas, right? Now, the other big thing you got to understand is because of these titans, Leibniz, Descartes, Pascal, Galileo, all these other big movers and shakers, movers and shakers, get it? With, like, the planets, and he was like, they shook. Now, the big thing, though, is it is going to have massive effects on society, right? So now, this is going to be one of the first times that words are on the screen again for this, okay? Now, the big societal effects of the scientific revolution include a lot of different things, right? But one of the biggest ones has to do with the fact that the legitimization of fields rather than theology, right? So for a long time, remember, Galileo was about to go be a doctor, even though doctors were garbage at this point, and studying medicine and things like that, but they were considered lesser fields than being a priest or studying different ideas of, like, theology, right? So the government also, because of this and the legitimization of fields other than theology, is going to begin to fund projects linking the outcomes of research to that with the state, right? The Royal Academy of Sciences, the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Royal Society in and of itself, right? All these other different items. Oh, you got to go potty? Give me 1 second. Somebody's got to go potty. Appreciate that, y'all. Definitely has a lot of effects on my society if he does not go to the bathroom in the house, right? So the big thing, though, is we are going to see the funding of other government projects linking the outcomes of the state. We're also, though, ironically enough, going to see the further barring of women from academia due to the scientific revolution. Now, a lot of us would actually think that maybe, just maybe, this increase in scientific study would actually include women and create a larger field of academia to actually bring them in. But ironically enough, what ends up happening is since women are not allowed to be admitted to these Royal Academy of Sciences, you're actually going to see the further detriment of women being involved in, like, actual scientific research, right? Now, limited effects on the economy or living standards, though. This is very, very big. So the scientific revolution did not affect the common everyday man, right? So, like, no man, no serf was walking around being like, my life is better now that I know that we are going around the sun, right? It didn't really affect them. And economic standards, it didn't really affect them either. It's going to take over 100 years for scientific theory and query and understanding to actually affect that of the, like, regular European, right? But however, you are going to see a massively big one, a big star right next to that one. The debate between religion and science really truly begins, because as science advances and provides a lot of answers to things that religion could not answer, or it's proving religious theories that are based on around Aristotle, Ptolemy, and also several other, like, and Archimedes and people like that, like, using this whole idea. It's disproving things from the Bible, so it actually is creating this debate between religion. Now, interesting little thing, though, the Copernican Protestant Catholic misconception. Something you got to understand is, starting with Copernicus, going all the way back to 1543 when he published his De Rev, you need to understand the fact that big things start happening, and yes, the church did not agree with his ideas, but Copernicus was a devout Catholic, right? So something you need to understand is that, like, Galileo, Kepler, Brahe, Copernicus, all those dudes were very, very religious, right? They were actually super religious individuals. And so going forward, you need to understand that it wasn't just the Catholic Church coming down on their ideas. Actually, early on, the Protestant community came down much, much more aggressively on scientific thinkers than that of the Catholic community. And it was the post-Counter-Reformation, post-Paul III Catholic Church that kind of starts to push science away as they reorganize the church following the 30 Years' War. Honestly, the scientific revolution might have progressed a lot faster should the 30 Years' War might not necessarily have happened, right? And then later on, as the Counter-Reformation church pushes sciences away, then the Protestant churches start to pull science in because the Dutch Republic and several other figures are like, oh, we can use this to make money, to make faster boats and faster physical things and different ideas like that, right? But like I said, though, again, like, that takes some time, right? It takes quite a bit of time until, like, surveyors in this 1800s print are using scientific understanding to, like, do their job better, right? So now, the big thing, though, that is affected heavily as well is medicine, the body, and chemistry, right? So going into it, just so you understand, everything about medicine pre-scientific revolution was based on the ideas of this guy named Galen, right? So now Galen published his works and findings about the human body and how he thought of medical science worked in about the year 150 AD, right? He would have been a Roman or possibly a Greco-Roman influence. And so back in 150 AD, Galen came up with a theory that basically everyone adopted, like genetic theory, right? Like, oh, this is for sure it. This explains everything, my personality, my sicknesses, all that other stuff, right? And so Galen, this Greek philosopher, believed that there were 4 fluids in the body, right? 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And if any of those fluids were out of order or unsettled or like more than one another, that affected your personality. It's the thing that got you sick and stuff like that, right? And so as we know now, this is false, right? And also, just so you know, he based most of these ideas on dissecting animals because autopsies were illegal in the Roman Empire at the time, right? And so also he's going to lead directly to a very, very big tradition in ancient Europe. And some of you are like, barber? People getting their hair cut? No. What ends up happening is this barber pole right here, tell this to your dad. He'll probably like it a lot because of these barber poles being out front of men's barbershops. Barbershops are the places where you went to get surgeries done in the ancient Roman era, right? You went to go get your hair cut at the same place you could get a tooth extracted. And Galen's ideas are going to lead to this concept known as bloodletting. And bloodletting happens to be a very enduring tradition in a lot of European countries all the way up until the 1700s. This idea that, oh, you're sick, let's drain some blood out of you, right? Oh, you're sick, let's get some bile out of you, right? These ideas of these fluids and their imbalances. And so barber poles actually during the Middle Ages and even in the late Roman Empire period had two colored stripes that went down them. One representing blood, the other one representing clean water. And the wash basin up here was the thing that leeches were traditionally stored in, and then the little thing down here was just supposed to be a receptacle that you caught the blood and water inside of, right? So Galen's ideas about these 4 humors or fluids is going to massively affect the study of medicine going forward, right? Until this guy comes along, Andreas Vesalius, who is one of my favorite Renaissance thinkers, and it takes me so long to be able to get to talk about him. It makes me so upset. Andreas Vesalius is the guy that comes along, and he professionalizes the study of the human body, and he begins to do autopsies on dead people to understand how bones are connected, where the muscle tissues go, where muscle fibers are, the layers of the human form. And a lot of his stuff begins to kind of throw back at Galen, like, bro, like, these fluid things is not necessarily true, right? Galen, for example, thought that all human beings had a two-hinged jaw due to the fact that some animals he did autopsies on had 2 hinged jaws. Humans don't. We have a singular hinged jaw. Vesalius figured that out, right? So, or actually disproved Galen's ideas. Galen thought that blood started in the liver and then moved throughout the body and then needed to be leaked out every now and again. Vesalius is going to realize that's not true, right, at all, okay? So, like, also another big one that Galen actually put forward was this concept or idea that basically, Wait, what was I going to say? I don't remember. All right, but anyway, Vesalius is the one that gets rid of most of that, right? And he apparently gets rid of it whenever he publishes his book in 1543. Yes, the same year that De Rev came out, De Humani Corporis Fabricum, who is very, very well known for having these amazing engravings inside of it, right? So look at these woodcuts that show the human form and like jovial kind of in unique like perspective. And in this book, he used it, including his self-portrait, to show the different connections of muscle fibers and also how the human body was constructed, right? And so with that, though, also, the very first copy of his book was bound in human skin, because he had a lot of it around, right? So, like, now the interesting part about it, though, is this dramatically changes things, leading to the inception of this guy named William Harvey. So William Harvey is a very, very important figure who is going to write a very famous book called De Morto Cortis, which actually means on the movement of the heart, right? And so from 1578 to 1657, when he was alive, he actually spent most of his adult career as the personal physician to none other than James I and the Sixth of Scotland, right? The first Stuart monarch. And he accomplished most of his work by performing this thing known as vivisection. Vivisection is not dissection. Dissection includes a dead thing, right? Vivisection is actually dissecting or opening up an already living like human form or an animal one, right? And so William Harvey is going to actually observe in animal studies, and when he cut open animals, he could see their heart pumping, right? So he is the first one to realize that the heart acts like a pump, and that disproves Galen's theories whatsoever of this like balance of fluids and things like that in the body, right? And that the heart apparently moves these things throughout the body. Now, funny enough, he ends up getting kicked out of scientific communities because of this idea, because he's going against Galen, and everybody's still a Galen fanboy at the time. Now, the thing about it was, is that he had stayed, he might have been able to help this guy, right? Well, he died 3 years before this guy died, but still, right? So, like, or before he actually came into power. So Charles II, the grandson of James I, is actually going to end up dying due to the lack of medical technology that was available because of the ignorance of people like William Harvey's ideas, right? Vesalius was ignored. Harvey was ignored for a very heavy amount of time. And it's going to lead to the death of Charles II. And y'all remember Charles II? He's this guy.
Oh, hail the King of Bling. Let's sing, bells ring, ding ding.
I'm the king who brought back partying. King.
Exactly. The king that got brought back partying actually died from a stroke, right? He died from a stroke that he could have lived through had his doctors not poked, prodded, and basically murdered him, right? So, like, they literally, like, rubbed, like, pigeon crap on his feet. They cupped his skin to yank out and create blisters, and they lanced him open. They force-fed him potions that made no sense, like, and they ended up killing him based on his medical treatment. It's wild. I'm putting it down in the description below, because it'll take me 20 minutes just to explain what happened, right? But continuing on medicine in the body, another couple of heavy hitters that are going to show up are these guys named Robert Hooke and Leeuwenhoek, which you've probably learned about in your sciences class before, because it all has to do with the microscope, right? Anton von Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch scientist, is actually going to create the very first microscope. Now, we know this and we believe this now, but there was a heavy debate on who created theirs first, right? So Leeuwenhoek's microscope looks like that, the thing that looks kind of like a ping pong paddle, where you would put the specimen on this little prod right there, and then that right there was a lens that you would look through. And he actually noticed while looking at a vial of pond water, or a drop of pond water, he saw single-celled organisms running around in it and stuff like that. And he was like, there's an entire world that exists outside of our ability to observe, right? And so Leeuwenhoek's ideas are going to like roll forward and start leading to the understanding of microscopes, understanding how to use them, understanding the world below us in a place that we can't necessarily see. Now, Robert Hooke, the guy that like Isaac Newton called a hunchback or whatever, because he had a slight hunchback, as you can see, he's leaned over this like table. He created a more advanced microscope, right? Because Leeuwenhoek actually only made a few, like dozen of his actual microscopes, and only a few of them got their hands on them, and he didn't tell anybody else how to use them or make them, right? So Robert Hooke then had to turn around and actually create his own, and he is going to create one, and on his, in his book, it's going to be fully detailed with these elaborate illustrations, right? This beautiful illustration right here of a louse or a lice cell, right? So, like, it's going to actually be a part of his, like, I think it's called, like, microtica, whatever. It's like literally actually this entire book that includes all of these ideas and things that he saw underneath his microscope, right? And so now that right there, that is the scientific revolution. In a nutshell, very important that we know it, but we are now moving into the period known as the Enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment is extremely important as it's related directly to this timeline we used in the very beginning, right? We talked about how the scientific revolution is going to lead directly to the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is going to focus on answering questions that aren't necessarily answered by science, right? And so what the Enlightenment is, if you were to give it a definition, it is the intellectual and cultural movement of the late 17th and early 18th century, right? The Enlightenment is all about using three key concepts: reason or rationalism, the scientific revolution study of human nature, right? Maybe not using science to figure out why humans act the way they do, but using the scientific perspective to understand philosophic concepts and progress, right? So the Enlightenment is going to focus on how do we govern? What is the role of religion? Why are we religiously intolerant? Where does this come from? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And the Enlightenment is going to be a massive, groundbreaking movement that's really going to be a broad term that we use as historians, kind of like the Renaissance, to argue, like, that actually spans, like, over 100 years, right? The Enlightenment's going to lead directly to the French Revolution. The Enlightenment's going to lead directly to government reform. It's going to lead to the enlightened monarchs, right? It's going to lead to the, better treatment of serfs and things like that and other religious individuals. The Enlightenment is phenomenally important, right? Now, the bunch of people believe that the Enlightenment, though, was caused by the backlash of the 30 Years' War and the Scientific Revolution. The Scientific Revolution taught people that you can question the lives around you and everything around you and better understand everything. The 30 Years' War taught us that war is really kind of ridiculous, kills millions of people, causes pestilence and famine all over things like religion, right? And so you're going to see the earliest Enlightenment thinkers, that being people like Spinoza and Bale. Now, there are two guys that came before them, okay? If you're looking at the four early hitters of the Enlightenment period, you've got Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, who we'll go over again before we get into the political Enlightenment, but then you've got Spinoza, his first name is Baruch Spinoza, and then you've also got Pierre Bayle, right? So Spinoza is going to be an important one, though, because he begins to argue not about government like Hobbes and Locke did. He starts talking about religion and its origins, like actually leading to war and hostilities. And he wrote a very famous book. First of all, just so you know, he was a Jewish person of Jewish descent that lived in a Jewish community inside of the Netherlands, right? Of course he lives in the Netherlands. He escaped literally from like Spain during his family moved during the Spanish Inquisition, and they actually left and went to the Netherlands where they began to study, and he actually went through a formal Jewish education his entire life, right? And in that process, he begins to question a lot of things. Stop. Okay, really? This is my life right now. Is this dog trying to climb out of his like crate container? Buddy, get down. All right, anyway, let me grab him. Now, anyway, I know you want to talk about Spinoza. I know you have a lot of ideas, right? So the big thing about it, though, is Spinoza's ideas and his education lead to him questioning a lot of different things. For example, the Old Testament, the God that we understand, like its big importance in history and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to throw up a video that I'm going to use from another kind of video that I found on the internet, and it does a way better job of explaining his ideas on God than I can, okay? But also, quick disclaimer, I'm not saying that I agree with these things. Don't give me a Mr. Terry said or anything like that. I'm telling you Spinoza's ideas, okay? And that is all. But here it is.
In the Ethics, Spinoza directly challenged the main tenets of Judaism in particular and organized religion in general. God is not a person who stands outside of nature. There is no one to hear our prayers or to create miracles or to punish us for misdeeds. There is no afterlife. Man is not God's chosen creature. The Bible was only written by ordinary people. God is not a craftsman or an architect, nor is he a king or a military strategist who calls for believers to take up the holy sword. God doesn't see anything, nor does he expect anything. He doesn't judge. He doesn't even reward the virtuous with a life after death. Every representation of God as a person is a projection of the imagination, and everything in the traditional liturgical calendar is pure superstition and mumbo-jumbo.
So yeah, Spinoza actually came out saying basically like this idea of like a human form God is ridiculous, right? It actually also talked about how prayer is like sending a little message to God to alter the universe, that actually none of that is like necessarily true, and that God actually exists much more as the union of nature and the world around us, right? That he's not like this omniscient, omnipresent thing that judges people and acts on them directly, that he actually has much more to do with the universe, mathematical law and theory. The force of gravity is God, right? So this this goes directly against a lot of the things that Descartes is bringing up. The idea that the rational mind is the rational mind of God, and that God gives us this logic and stuff like that. But he does, like Spinoza argues the ideas of perception. He also says that there's no such thing, oh bless you, that there's no such thing as good and evil. All of these things are extremely radical ideas, right? Now, due to this, he's actually going to get ran out of his Jewish community completely, and he's not even allowed to talk to his family until the day he died. He actually spent hey, come back here. He spent the rest of his days grinding down. He spent the rest of his days grinding down lenses and stuff like that for a career and tutoring anybody that would listen to him, right? So now that is a big indicator, though, of the reemergence of this thing called skepticism, right? And skepticism is the idea that you take nothing as handed to you and you question everything, right? That nothing is beyond the shadow of a doubt. So it's saying question the ancient and medieval, like you got ancient and medieval skeptics, Plato, Aristotle, and Diogenes, the guys that we base all of our things about the understanding of the universe. They were skeptics in and of themselves. Cicero was a skeptic. Augustine was a skeptic. So basically it's the idea is like, why are we listening to their ideas? We should question their ideas and be skeptical like them, right? So Pierre Bayle was another famous skeptic. He was a Huguenot that actually fled from France to guess where? The Netherlands. And he was a famous skeptic, and he argued against the tyrannical reign of Louis XIV, which was like a hot-button issue at the time. It's like nobody comes out and says anything mean about Louis XIV. And he publishes his thing called this Historical and Critical Dictionary, where he publishes any and every piece of finding that he actually can, right? He also criticizes the religious turmoil of the era. He advocated for both sides, saying that Protestants and Catholics and even atheists could be right. And people were like, what did you say? Because he actually apparently died an atheist himself. So it's an interesting concept that he said that, like, basically religious toleration is the thing we should move towards, not the understanding of saying that they are wrong and leading to warfare, right? But we're going to stop right there. I know this is a long one, but I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.